What's up guys, Asian here again with another PTS video, and today we are going to be talking about dual wield traits on stamina DPS. So why are we talking about dual wield traits? Shouldn't they still be infused? What happened on the Wrathstone PTS to kind of warrant re-examining our dual wield traits? Well, on the Wrathstone PTS, enchants on your one-handed weapon, so that's your swords, daggers, axes, and maces, they are now at half of the potency compared to a two-handed weapon. So if we go ahead and take a look at our stamina enchant, absorb stamina enchant, this is Nirnhoned actually, and I'm gonna transfer this to Infused real quick just so we have an accurate comparison here. So our Infused absorb stamina enchant right now on our dagger, this is a one-handed weapon, deals 1691 physical damage and restores 230 stamina. Now if we take a look at these Great Sword, this is a two-handed sword. Our Absorb Stamina enchant deals 3383 physical damage and restores 461 stamina. So the damage and the amount of stamina restored has been cut in half for our dagger. That's going to be the case across all the two-handed weapons compared to all of the one-handed weapons. So tanks, all of your enchants on your sword and board bar have been cut in half. Magic DPS, you guys are not affected by this because staves are already considered two-handed weapons. So it's really only tanks and stamina DPS that were affected by this change. So today we're going over the stamina DPS and how this change might affect our traits that we have on our front bar here. So what are the other options that were kind of raised as for our dual wield traits? So obviously we have Infused, we can still stick with double Infused potentially, but there are two other traits that we might want to consider. One of them, as you can see here, is Nirnhoned. So Nirnhoned used to actually be one of the traits you would want on your front bar back when they rebalanced the traits in Horns of the Reach about, this must have been probably a little over a year ago now at this point, maybe a year and a couple of months ago. Nirnhoned was buffed and that ended up actually pushing it ahead in terms of what sort of trait you wanted on your main hand here. So Nirnhoned is one trait that we took a look at. Now the thing with Nirnhoned is because dual wielding, the way that you inherit the weapon damage from when you dual wield is a little bit tricky. So Nirnhoned will boost your dagger damage up, your one-handed weapon damage up from 1335 to 1535, so you get 200 additional weapon damage. However, if that is on your offhand, you actually do not inherit all 200 of that damage because your offhand contributes only a fraction of the total weapon damage to your overall weapon damage. So if we are going to go with Nirnhoned, it would only be active on our main hand, or we would have it active on both hands. So we would never have Nirnhoned active on just our offhand. So that's one limitation. The other trait that we took a look at is Precise. So Precise gives us additional crit chance. Let me see if I can find it here. So Precise increases our weapon crit by 3.5%. Always nice to have some additional crits. That just helps out our crit modifier when we have Major Force active. So Precise might also be a good choice as well. And of course there's always Sharpened as well. If you ever need that additional penetration, Sharpened will always be probably the strongest trait there is, just because increasing in penetration is generally the best and easiest way to increase your DPS. So if you need additional penetration, you could go with Sharpened as well. However, I did not test Sharpened because I'm assuming that you're able to hit that penetration cap without needing to use Sharpened. In other words, you're in a group that has very good Alkaj uptime, that has very good Crusher uptime from a Frost Staff, so we didn't really examine Sharpened. Not to mention that our results would be a little bit skewed towards Sharpened because we are doing self-buff tests, so we don't want to necessarily kind of skew our results a little bit by using Sharpened here. So one other thing that I also kind of had to be a little bit careful of is with an one infused hand, so whether that's on my main hand or my offhand, which enchant I had on that infused weapon might play a difference. So my Absorb Stamina enchant, as you can see here, deals 1691 physical damage, but an Infused Poison Damage enchant deals 2256 poison damage. Now that's not just the only thing, so it's not just the damage we're taking a look at, we're also taking a look at the stamina that we get back. So Infused gives us 230 stamina on an Absorb Stamina, but if I change it to anything else, they only restore 177 stamina. So that stamina restoration might play a difference in our overall sustain. So I decided to test out whenever I had Infused on only one of my hands. I tested it out with an Absorb Stamina enchant, and then I swapped that enchant around, so that way I put the Poison enchant on the Infused and then the Absorb Stamina on the non-infused hand. So I did all these tests on a Stamina Nightblade. My race was a Khajiit. I was using Lava Foot to stimulate having Artem take away Broth as well as Orbs. That's just to ensure that I never run out of stamina. So as a Khajiit, there were a couple of set combinations, trait combinations that did really test my sustain. However, I was able to fully sustain a light attack rotation on all of these different combinations. So without further ado, let's go ahead and break out the numbers. So here we are. Here are all the tests that I did. Now I do want to mention here a couple of caveats and a couple of things to keep in mind as we go through these numbers here. First of all, this is a self-buff parse, so I don't have access to group buffs. For example, Minor Brutality. I don't have access to the Warhorn buff. I don't have access to Major Force. So those might skew our results a little bit, particularly the precise results, because the Major Force playing a little bit better with the additional crit chance that you get from precise. So that's just something you want to keep in mind there, that I don't have that Major Force. So even though precise might end up being a little bit lower when you introduce that Major Force uptime, it might help push precise ahead by a little bit here. So our tests were as follows. We did the typical 2 times infused, which is kind of our baseline, so to speak. So our baseline here was averaging 51.3k. Then we did Nirn on the main hand, Infused on the offhand, and again, like I mentioned earlier, I did Infused with the Absorb Stam, then Infused with the Poison enchant. Typically speaking, you should expect the Poison to do a little bit more damage, but I did get a pretty lucky parse here with the Absorb Stam enchant, so this is kind of skewing the results a little bit. If I take out that result here, you can see here that the results are pretty similar there. So Nirn Infused with the Absorb Stam pulled about 51.6k, Nirn Infused with the Poison enchant pulled 51.5k. Then I did Nirn on the main hand, Precise on the offhand. This used to be a meta trait setup maybe about 3 or 4 patches ago before we went with double Infused. That pulled 51.1k. Then we did Infused on our main hand, Precise on our offhand, again trading off that Absorbed Stamina and the Poison enchant on that Infused main hand here. 50.5k, it was the Infused Precise with the Absorbed Stamina enchant. 50.6 was the Infused Precise with the Poison enchant. Then I did double Precise, which pulled almost 50k, and then double Nirn, which pulled 50.1k. So as we can see here, the differences are fairly minimal at best. The biggest difference is from that 2 times Precise, and again, that Major Force uptime will boost 2 times Precise more than the other combinations here, so that's just something to keep in the back of your head here. Solo parses are a little bit tricky to kind of fully extrapolate out to raid parses, so don't necessarily take this word for word. You might want to take a look at raid buff parses in order to get a better idea of what traits you want to get, but 2 times Precise did seem to perform the worst, at least in solo self-buff tests, with Nirn Infused pulling the highest, regardless of whether that's Absorbed Stamina or Poison. Now, Nirn Precise on a self-buffed test did pull better than the Infused Precise, regardless of whether that was Absorbed Stamina or Poison enchant on that Infused weapon. That being said, like I mentioned with a double Precise, when you have additional Major Force uptime, you're going to get a slightly better buff because of that additional crit chance you have compared to Nirn Infused. So the difference between Nirn Precise versus Nirn Infused here was about a little bit less than 1%. So again, I tend to use the arbitrary cutoff of 1% difference as quote-unquote significant. So in terms of traits themselves, I would probably stick with any of these 4 combinations. So 2 times Infused, Nirn on the main hand, Infused on the offhand, or Nirn on the main hand, Precise on the offhand. Either of these 4 traits seem to be doing very, very well. Naturally, like I mentioned earlier, Nirn Precise is going to scale a little bit better with groups that have very good Major Force uptime. So if you're in one of those groups, you might want to consider doing Nirn Precise. However, if you don't have the transmute crystals to transmute your weapons into Nirn or Precise, then you can stick with 2 times Infused. 2 times Infused is not a bad option at all. Yes, you are going to see a DPS loss. That's just the nature of cutting your enchant damage in half. You're just going to eat a DPS loss. So based on reports and other parses that I've seen, it seems like on a solo self self-buffed parse, you're taking a look at maybe a 2k to 3k loss. In a raid parse, that translates to about 5 to 6k based on what Lyco has kind of tested and seen, as well as what I have seen from parses that have been shared on toxic raiding environment. So overall, 2x Infused is still a good combination, but if you do want to maximize your DPS, going Nirn Infused is not a bad choice, and Nirn Precise if you are in a group with good Warhorn uptime. I'd probably not lean towards Infused Precise or double Precise, double Nirn, at least based on these tests. Even when you include group buffs, they probably won't scale as nicely, and they're already lower than the other results, so that's just something you want to keep in mind here. So again, double Infused, Nirn Infused, or Nirn Precise are the 3 combinations that I would recommend going for. So that's it for this video. Hope you guys found this informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.